Hey everyone, before we get started, take a second to like and subscribe to the show.
It's the best way to help us share great information with more people. Thank you.
Caregiving can be full of love and also moments you maybe don't post about, that anger that flashes out of nowhere, and the guilt that follows right behind. Today, we're going to be talking about feelings that caregivers are taught to hide, why they show up, and what it really means when they do.
And we have the pleasure of doing that with Lisa Kendall, who it's her third time being on the show. So if you haven't heard her past episodes, you need to go back and listen to them. Lisa is a coach, a facilitator, and a trainer who helps every member of the Care Partner team harness their inner wisdom and creativity so they can live a peace, meaning, and purpose. And that sounds good, right? So as a retired social worker, a psychotherapist, and clinical gerontologist, it has been her privilege to serve as an expert in the aging and elder care field for more than 45 years. And not just in healthcare, but also in the lines of business and higher education. Lisa, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you both for inviting me. It's great to see you.
Yeah, thanks for being back on Care Lab. I have to say, we're almost at our 100th episode, if you can believe it.
That is crazy.
And Lisa was one of our very first guests way back in the beginning. So thanks for your support then, and thanks for your support now. But we are so excited to have you on. You're absolutely one of our favorites.
Oh, thank you. I love being here with you guys, and congratulations. 100 is a big milestone.
Almost there.
We're getting there.
Okay, so let's just dive right in today. Yeah, I think we all want to talk about, the compassionate side of caregiving, how caregiving can in some ways like fill us up if we have the right perspective. But of course, there are lots of emotions that come along with caregiving, anger and guilt being two of the big ones. Do you want to start by just kind of talking a little bit about what that experience can be like, Lisa?
Yeah, I think we talk so much about caregiving. We refer to the people who accepts care oftentimes when we're in workshops or articles or things like that as our loved ones. And sometimes the ways we talk about caregiving make us feel like if we have a feeling that we label as negative, like anger or guilt or even just exhaustion or resentment, all those things that come up, we feel like we're doing something wrong, or we're just not thinking about it the right way, we're failing somehow. And then we feel bad, and then our feelings sort of spiral downwards, right? And we judge ourselves, and that critical voice comes up. And there's plenty about any relationship with another person, especially when there are lots of extra stresses added to it, that can lead to these really natural, very human feelings. And when we get into that kind of spiral, we feel like we're the only ones, right? So we don't want to tell anybody else that we're angry with our person who's accepting care. And we, I got a lot to say about it, so let me just stop there. But let me say the whole range of feelings that people have as caregivers are very natural and normal. And, just like we get mad at our kids or mad at our spouse or partner, mad at our neighbor, I mean, of course we get angry in caregiving as well. The stakes feel higher somehow. And I've been thinking a lot about this, what it is about that anger or that circumstance, those feelings when we come up against them, that makes us feel so guilty. So I do have some thoughts about that.
I think you bringing up the term loved one is kind of important, because I used to always say that. I used to always be like, oh, and your loved one. And then I came into this string of caregiver interactions with patients whose primary caregiver was their ex-spouse. And not that they might not still have love for them, and I'm not sure, because I'm treating the patient and I often didn't see that spouse, that ex-spouse. But it created this like significant conflict. And I think of a specific story in which the person was an alcoholic and was living alone, but had something happen that caused them to have like some kind of break or a hip fracture or something like that was happening orthopedically. But he wasn't doing very well alone, and she was still clearly had some level of like care about him and was making sure to do like the minimum stuff that he needed, like make sure there was food there and that his medicines were there. But it was clear that they didn't have that same relationship anymore. They were exes. He was still struggling with addiction. He was on his own. And I never ever got to meet her, but it just made me think strongly about like, oh man, maybe using that terminology isn't the best way to handle it, because there's a lot of complex emotions there. So my question for you is like, if somebody's in that situation, or maybe their parent didn't treat them well when they were kids, and they're like the one who's kind of in charge by default, and like this doesn't feel like a loving situation, but you also don't want to leave them hanging, or maybe you do, like talk to us a little bit about some ways that people can like pull that apart in their mind, and I don't know, how do they deal with that?
Yeah, in at least one of my other visits, we talked about that situation where people might be caring for someone who was not caring towards them. Maybe they were neglectful, or they lived with their own mental health issues, and maybe they still are abusive in some way. So those are real issues for folks. And again, the messages they may have gotten is, don't talk about this outside of our family, or everything's fine here. It is all in your head. This is your fault. I mean, those kinds of dysfunctional, and by dysfunctional, I mean painful functioning families that operate in a painful way, are not uncommon. And again, I think people in those situations feel isolated. They feel like they're the only one. I think having a conversation like the one we're having today goes a long way towards helping to affirm for people that they're not the only one, and that there are ways and strategies that they can maybe approach that relationship. And it's a lot of the old wisdom, but we do have to be careful of the language. So using the term loved one might not be the right one. And I don't know that there is a great word for it. Your elder feels like, your pet somehow. I mean, that just doesn't feel right. Person accepting care is the one I kind of default to, because it is empowering to them. They are accepting care. But it goes back to those issues of taking care of yourself, setting healthy boundaries, and knowing what that even means in the context of a relationship where there have been boundary violations. It is a situation, if there is a painful relationship, I would strongly encourage somebody to seek out a counselor, a therapist, a clergy person who has ability and insight and experience working with that situation, because trauma is often involved, and there are very effective ways to treat that. And the answers may be learning how to say no when you've never done that before, but then having the support you need to face the backlash that you will get when you say no for the first time in a relationship. And there are ways to do that that may be more effective than other ways. That boils down to communication strategies. And there are also ways to learn how to delegate and to, answer questions. Certainly, I've run into families where I hear from the caregiver, well, I do everything for my mom because she won't let anybody else do it. And even though I'm 75 myself and I really can't be shoveling her icy driveway anymore, she just won't let anybody else do it. So what I've done in those situations is really work with them on how to have those hard conversations, and how to say, here's what I can do, and here's what I can't do, but I can help you find somebody else. And if you're not comfortable with it, I'm happy to be here. What's hard about that? Just helping them facilitate that conversation. And when all else fails, recognizing that the world will not end, that the person may have pardon the phrase, they may have a tantrum about it. They may bluster, they may blow, but it's not as big a consequence at this stage of your life as it was when you were 5. We carry those images with us of the very powerful, really life-saving. I mean, when we're little, we're dependent on our parents. But when we get bigger, we are no longer truly dependent, but we still carry that feeling that we are. So now I've just gone off on a therapy therapy rant, but yeah, those are things that you can work out with a therapist and learn how to cope with. But it isn't easy. It's not always something that you can do without good support.
Would you, and I think you've started to talk about some of these already, would you talk a little bit about some communication strategies that people might use in order to say no or draw a boundary?
Sure. First of all, I like to think about boundaries as being flexible. And now I'm having a flashback. I might have talked about this before too.
I was gonna say we did it. If that sounds like something that would be helpful for you, go back and take a look at one of our. I'll find it. We'll link it in the notes, folks. The past episode.
Yeah, that sounds
with Lisa.
right. But boundaries should be flexible, so they protect something. They can keep something in, but they can also open to let something that's helpful in from the outside. So you can hold a boundary by saying, no, I need this time for my nap. I need this time for rest. I'm sick. I need to stay home. Or you can open a boundary and say, I really need help with this. I'd like to invite you to come into this space to give us some help. So that's a quick and dirty way to do that. I just want to say about communication, there's some wonderful, wonderful work by I'm blanking on the name now, Marshall Rosenberg, who created nonviolent communication. And that is the most amazing model. I learned about it when I was co-facilitating some training with Rebecca Hubbard. She and I taught for the Eden Alternative. And I learned from her so much about how when people have an emotion, and that's what we're talking about today, it represents an unmet need, and that we all have needs, that there are these universal needs. We all need to feel competent. We all need to feel safe. We all need to feel like we're connected to others. Just a couple of examples out of pages of universal needs that we have. And sometimes when one person has an emotion and they express it, often with humans, we don't express it well. So I might be frustrated. I'm dealing with something on the phone. I can't get my bank to cooperate, and I'm cranky. And somebody comes up to me and they just ask me for something, and I'm like, right? I give them that reaction. But they have a different need that they're trying to get met, and they're met with this anger from me. And again, as humans, we need to feel connected. We need to feel heard. We need to feel safe. I've now just inadvertently smacked into their needs, and they're like, whoa, what did I do? Well, they didn't do anything. We all need to slow down. And there used to be a wonderful psychologist, a radio psychologist that I listened to when I was driving around in my car doing home visits when I worked for home health care, and her name was Dr. Joy Brown. And the thing I remember most from her is she would always say, be curious, not furious. But it requires that we know how to pause before reacting. And honestly, that's the secret to the emotional universe. If we as a race of human beings on the planet could just pause before reacting and choose our response, we would stop having wars. We would stop having fights. Everybody would get along because we'd be able to be curious about what the other person is needing in that moment. We'd be able to think more deeply about what our own body, our own emotions, what our own system is telling us that we need, and then we'd be able to negotiate it. That's what communication really is. All this other stuff gets in the way of communication. An emotion, even a thought, can be real in the moment in terms of how you're reacting, but it's not necessarily factual. So the reaction I'm having to somebody else's angry remark causes a real bunch of stuff in my body, but it's not based on reality. Just like the person who felt sort of terrorized and unsafe as a child in a certain home might still feel that way when they're an adult and they're very competent, and that same parent is speaking in maybe a derisive way, or just comparing them to that other kid who never shows up, but they never do wrong. Well, we all know that dynamic, right? So, yeah, I think the key is to slow down, to be curious about what the other person is dealing with in that moment. Take that space, take that breath. It only takes a few seconds for the emotions to ride. It's like surfing the emotions. That's what we call it. We ride the emotion, take a breath, do a reset, label it in your head. What am I feeling? I'm feeling angry. I'm feeling upset that you just snapped at me. I need a minute. Let me breathe. Let me calm down. What's happening here? You seem really upset, and just talk it out. And then you can hug it out. Yeah.
I have two things that I have to say here. One is, if I were getting home help and you showed up at my door, I would be the happiest person and like the luckiest person ever.
For sure.
I think. Because you really are, you have such a gift for educating and for helping people process things. And again, I'm just so thankful to have you here with us again today. But two, I just wanted to kind of like really highlight that. I love that phrase, be curious, not furious. And the idea that these emotions are so fleeting. I literally had this conversation with my kids the other day because they were arguing about something or something had happened. And so, we have these big emotions that happen right away. But the time that we're having those big emotions, like you said, Lisa, it's really fleeting. It's short. The stronger the emotion, actually, the shorter the time period that we spend in it. So if we can just, to your point, take a pause, let it pass, and process it, then it's so much easier to respond in a way that doesn't escalate things, but can allow us to work things out in a way that is much more productive for everyone.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy actually to think that the things that make us the most upset, for the shortest amount of time, we react to that right away and then have long-lasting impacts from it. Like either from the words that you say or the thing that you did, or you broke this thing or whatever it is, right? And I'm so glad that you mentioned how fleeting it is, how much time it takes, because that was going to be my question. Because I find, my life is kids these days, even for me interacting with them, if I take a deep breath and count, and then in that moment of counting, one, they see me counting, and so they're like, ooh, I should have probably not did that. And then, so that helps. And then
that's
two,
clue number one.
number one, I was counting. But then it just really takes like 12 seconds to be like, okay, curious, why are you acting like this? Okay, what can I do about managing that? And then also, like, what do I feel? But I wonder, though, as a person who's been trying to practice this for my own self, how can you make sure that being curious and not furious doesn't turn into accepting all things? Do you know what I mean?
Ooh, that's a good question.
It's always my fault, and I can not necessarily. It can be felt like it's always your fault. You have to figure out how you take
responsibility for everything,
yeah,
even though it's not your responsibility.
Yes, that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
How do you make sure that you're not always taking responsibility?
That's a wonderful, wonderful question. And I think the answer lies in not just being curious about what the other person is going through, but in being equally curious about your own responses and listening to that and listening back. Because whatever that other person is going through, you deserve peace. You need connection. You need compassion. You need to be heard. And if you're in a relationship with somebody who's not willing or able to do that, then something needs to change. When I talked with clients, I used to give the example of if a parent was verbally abusive and it was really affecting a person, and they just, or not just a parent, could be anybody, and it was just really hurtful. I remember asking folks, well, what would you do if they had some kind of a movement disorder and they couldn't help but lash out and they were punching you in the face every few seconds? You would have to physically move yourself away from that, and you'd have to make sure that you were not harmed. And it's similar, I think. There's no difference. You don't have to be a verbal punching bag either if someone has a mental health or a neurological condition that's causing them to do that. Now, that being said, I'm not at all saying that we should make excuses like, well, they're just doing that because they have dementia. People who live with dementia or other cognitive challenges are often escalated and have what we unfortunately refer to as behaviors because their true needs are not being met and they have difficulty verbalizing them. Dementia often affects our ability to speak well or clearly about what we truly need, and they can be set off by things in the environment or by frustration. So I think, especially in modern times, it's just way too easy. Like the minute somebody says, well, your mom has, and I've heard people say that this is what they've been told, yeah, you have dementia, go home, make your final plans, and just wait for the end because there's nothing we can do for you. That is so not true. Both the person who lives with cognitive challenges and their family members or friends, people around them, can learn how to communicate in ways that are respectful, that are person focused, that are unique to that person's needs and their style. They can learn to create an environment. Dr. Al Power, who's a geriatrician who wrote the books Dementia Beyond Drugs and Dementia Beyond Disease, talks about, he gives this great analogy. He said people who have mobility issues, we've built ramps for them to get into buildings. And he said to fail to build cognitive ramps for people who need that support and assistance in connecting with us would be just like us standing on the second floor and tossing down a hammer and some nails and maybe some wood to the person who can't ambulate on their own and saying,
Yeah, or be like, hey, come up here. How come you can't come?
Yeah, not even throwing them the tools. So yeah. And I love the idea of cognitive ramps. Instead of saying, hey, you be like me because I'm normal and it's your job to talk like I do and think like I do. So I'm going to give you drugs, make you act like I do. I'll do whatever I can to make you normal. And if you can't do it, I'm going to write you off. We need to think more like, what do we need to do to help this person communicate? And maybe that's a completely new way of communicating. We need to learn their language. So now I've gone into a different thing, but I think a lot of anger and frustration and then guilt comes up for family members when dementia is involved. We know that it's a little stronger. In fact, there's a guilt assessment tool, and it was specifically designed for people who are caregivers of family members or people who accept care who have cognitive challenges. So we know that that's a little higher risk than caring for someone who can communicate really well. So I guess it's a valid thing to talk about today.
Yeah, I think let's kind of dig down a little bit more into this idea of, anger so often being followed by guilt. And I think that can be an experience in lots of different types of relationships. I get angry with my kids and then I feel guilty because I got angry at my kids, right? Which is kind of a caregiving situation, right? But you can feel that about a lot of different things. I think it's really pronounced when it comes to caregiving, when we label ourselves as a caregiver and then the person that we are providing care for, we are angry at. I feel like that guilt comes on even stronger. Can you talk about why that might be?
I had my own recent experience with this, and it is so much more powerful than I realized. And I've been working with this for decades, and I realized several decades into this experience that everyone's care situation is unique, and something that is almost universal is guilt and this guilt about anger. But it's powerful when it comes. And I think one thing I remember noticing, it just kind of came to me in a white light moment, is that oftentimes guilt comes because in a caregiving situation, unlike so many other things in life, you can work hard, and the harder you work, the bigger the payoff often, right? So you work hard, you get good grades. You work hard, you get a promotion. You do well, you're going to get that gold star. No matter how hard you work as a family caregiver or taking care of a friend, chances are, unless we're talking about, unique acute health issues that do get better, but often taking care of an older loved one, you're talking about a trajectory where people are going to become more frail over time, and eventually they're going to be in an end of life situation, and eventually they will die. So no matter how hard you work, the outcome is not that you will have saved them, if we're thinking just in Western terms of what it means to help. And I phrase it that way because I think we have this idea that care means cure, that somewhere in our mind we think if we just take care of them enough, if we love them hard enough, or I've seen caregivers give folks who live with dementia workbooks and say, if they do these math problems, they're gonna get that ability back. We have this idea that if we work hard enough and if we make them work hard enough, they'll be okay. So there's anger and frustration that comes up first because of how we've defined it. We think that care means cure. And I have to give credit to the Eden Alternative, an international not-for-profit organization that I have worked with and volunteered for many, many years. And they are redefining how we think about care. And it's important because it recognizes that care is helping someone to grow, and that everyone, no matter what their apparent limitations are, has something to offer and something to help us to grow. And that we can grow right up until the moment that we take our last breath. So what are those gifts? Those gifts might be about making peace. They might be about accepting peace. They might be about accepting life the way it is. There's all sorts of ways that we grow that are not about jumping up and lifting weights and running marathons. That's a very adult stage of life way of thinking, and it doesn't have much to do with elderhood or about the natural cycle of life that might occur younger if you are living with a serious illness. So we have to think about care as more than treatment for the body alone. We have to think about care more holistically, and we have to think about care as something that we all deserve, if that starts to answer that question. So I think that's one source of anger and frustration and guilt. The other thing is, I've seen so often, and I experienced myself, that we do, and it's maybe related, we do tend, if we see someone that we love or care about doing something that we feel like is making their condition worse. So my mouth is dry, sorry. So somebody who really benefits from using a cane or a walker. They don't like using it, they don't want to use it, but as the care partner, that they are less likely to fall, they're more steady, they should be using it. You have a need for safety. You have a need for them not to become more ill, because that's a bigger job for you to do.
It affects you.
It affects you. But they may have a need that has to do with how they appear to other people. It may have to do with their idea of competence. Again, we're living in this culture that defines robustness and productivity and youth and strength as the ideal, and we're not looking at the beauty that can come in different stages of life and health. So when the person does not want to use the cane and doesn't use the cane, I have seen anger, real gut level anger, rise up in the care partner. And it comes from several places. It comes from, I love you and I don't want to lose you any sooner than I have to. I hate that this is happening to any of us. I don't want to have to take care of more than I already am because I'm afraid I can't. If you break your hip, I might have to think about taking you to an assisted living or a nursing home or someplace where, because I can't lift you anymore, and you've already told me that you don't want to go, so now we're going to have a fight. I mean, you
Yeah.
get into all these levels, but that anger is real, and it does flash. It just, like you said, Amelia, at the beginning, it just shoo, comes out of nowhere. And it's powerful. So I think it can come from lots of places. I do want to say that anger can fuel our lashing out, not just verbally, but depending on a lot of things, including our own level of tolerance and maybe how we were raised ourselves, we can lash out physically. And it is something to watch for if you are in a situation where you are hurting the person that you're caring for, if you are hitting them or you're afraid you might hit them. It's really important that you get help for that. It's just not okay to do that, and there is help available, even if right now you can't see it. You can't quite believe that that help is available. You just don't want to go down that road. And you can be that frustrated, and those feelings can be that strong. And we know that it happens. So I just want to put that little caveat in there. It's important to pay attention to. So pay attention if you're just feeling, we end up not getting enough sleep, right? We end up exhausted. We end up potentially hurting ourselves, right? We end up with back injuries, and it's not an easy job. There is so much available in many places, and in some places there isn't, and it just calls for a really thoughtful, compassionate conversation. And underneath all of that are often other feelings like sadness and grief. That there isn't more available to help, that there isn't a cure, that there isn't more time.
Yeah, I think the example that you gave of a person being really upset about the person not using their tools that could keep them safe really resonates with me, because I've seen it so many times, such that like I'm talking to the client who's in front of me, but behind them is their caregiver, and I'm asking questions like I don't know anything, so I could hear from them what's going on. And I'm like, oh, you have a cane, but you didn't use it when you came to answer the door. Tell me about that. And the family caregiver behind them is just like, raging silently to let me know, because I can see them, that like, yes, I have this problem all the time. And I think that's just such a perfect example of how, like, if something is happening repeatedly, you can use your strategy of being curious instead of furious, right? Because usually what ends up happening is I come in as the curious one and figure out that the need is, this is ugly and it makes me feel like I'm old and I don't want to feel like I'm old. And then we can come to some other conclusion. There's more than one way to get something done. And then both needs are met, right? Then the person is safe and supported with whatever tool we end up with that they can feel good about. And then the caregiver feels good that like they're safe and that all the things that you just said don't happen. And it happens so frequently. I just wanted to like pull that out as like one specific example of the way if you're thinking about like how can I be curious and not furious. Those are really good ones, because that's the challenge. Like you have a need and they have a need and they don't go together, but nobody's talking about it. Nobody's saying that.
I love that you said that, Dr. Brandy, because I'm often the caregiver in the back going like, no, and I can't give personal examples right now, but I love that you said that, because you also touched on the universal need that both people have to be heard, right? And to have those needs met. And it's important if you are the caregiver and you're not able to be heard maybe in the room with the provider who's asking those curious questions. I've always encouraged family members, or I use the word family very very openly can include anybody who's involved, to go ahead and write a letter or make a phone call ahead of time and say, hey, I just want you to know this is something I'm concerned about. Here's what I'm noticing. And I encourage people to keep that short, make it like a one-page note. Here's what I'm observing. My parent is sleeping more hours, or we went out for walks 5 times last week and 4 times they didn't take their cane, or they're arguing with me about taking the cane. Put it in very behavioral terms. I encourage the caregivers not to make a diagnosis, to leave that to the professionals, but to write down what they see in what we would call behavioral terms. What's the behavior that what you're watching? What is it that you can see? Keep it to one page. If you send that in ahead of time to the primary care provider, the occupational therapist, whoever it is that you're consulting with, the office staff don't have any place to put that but right in the chart. So first of all, you're making a record of it, and then the provider will see it before they see the person. One time early in my career, and it could happen again, I'm not going to lie, a person did that. They had sent a letter in to the family doctor, and the family doctor, talking with the elder, said, "So your daughter thinks you're depressed." Well, that was not helpful. All the more reason to keep things in very predictable, very, very definable terms. Like, even if they're going to blow the whistle on you as the informant, they can say, "I understand that you're sleeping more. I understand that you're not eating as much as you used to eat." And then they can ask those deeper questions to find out, is that about medication? Is that about loneliness? Is that about a disease process? Is there maybe some depression going on? So there's, as providers, we all have these flow charts that we go through to get to the answers to that. Family members have no real clue about what that process is, but they have all the information about what's going on outside of the office, where we're only getting this much. So we have to partner with them to get that information and to work with them to create really good care plans that are going to work for everybody.
So I want to talk a little bit about, because y'all know I'm 100% all about, use the professionals around you, use your providers, build your team so that you're not trying to constantly just like butt heads with the person that you're caring for. So you have some more strategies and tools coming in. But I also know that there is someone listening, at least one person listening to this right now, who said, I've talked to all these providers. Everyone has come in and tried. My person will still not do what they're asking people to do. And I'm at my wit's end, and like, what now? And so, because the fact is that sometimes we can't just tie everything up sort of like neatly in a bow where everyone is happy at the end of the day. How do we make peace with that? That's like a really hard question. So sorry.
No, I've actually run into I think what the hardest situation could be with that. And it's always nice if there's a win-win-win, and we know that there are compromises that need to be made, and that sometimes you as the caregiver and sometimes the person as the elder really ends up having to do something that they don't want to do. And I've worked in nursing homes in my career as well, and I've certainly been there when a lot of folks came in and did not want to. They were placed there because social services said, "This is where you're going. It's not safe at your home. You have to go." People can be placed against their will.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't know that. If it's not safe at home, but again, people are adults and they can make choices even if they're not safe most of the time. So I think you often will hear, if somebody is widowed, the family gets real concerned about the person who's remaining. It's like, well, they're living in a house that has a lot of stairs. Maybe mom needs to go to a retirement community. Well, mom doesn't want to. Everybody's worried. They'd like her to go, but she says, "Nope, I'm going to stay here in my house." And sometimes family members need to have support in recognizing that they may have to wait until there's a crisis. And everybody needs to recognize that the longer you wait to do planning, the less choice you have about what can happen. So in that example, mom may be fine. She lives out the rest of her natural life in that house, carrying her laundry up and down stairs, and she's happy. I have a great story about that. I had a call one time from a family who were really concerned about an older man. And I think when I first heard from them, he was in his 70s or 80s, but he had a heart condition and he loved hunting in the woods. And they were worried, what do? We don't want him out hunting by himself. What if he has a heart attack in the woods and he dies and nobody's there? So we really talked it through, and they ended on the place where we talked about the pros and the cons and all that and his choice. They ended up just supporting his decision to do that. And I got a call from them years later, and they said that their dad, granddad, great granddad had finally passed away at the age of 93 or 94 years old. He had died out in the woods hunting alone, and they all felt wonderful and at peace because he died doing what he loved. And if they had tried to make him stay home when he was first diagnosed with that heart condition, like 20 years before, he would have had 20 years of misery sitting in his chair wishing he was out in the woods hunting. So there's this idea. Dr. Bill Thomas, another geriatrician and somebody that I admire, he's really my hero, he talks about surplus safety. And that's where we're so worried about the potential consequences in somebody's life that we don't allow them to live their life. And there's like a downside risk to letting them live their life the way they want to live it. But what's the upside benefit to them doing that? And we have to, in our culture, we still value autonomy over everything. And at the same time, we already mentioned this, there's this idea of relational ethics. So it's like, yeah, okay, mom, but if you break your hip, who's going to take care of you? It's going to be me, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's complicated, and sometimes families get stuck, and sometimes families need to walk away if it's too painful or you just can't do it. I've seen families where folks promised, I will never, ever, ever ask anybody else to take care of you. I will take care of you here at home forever. And a little tiny 90-pound, 90-year-old wife realizes that she cannot take care of her 300-pound husband after he has a stroke and cannot even budge him in the hospital bed. No matter how much help you bring into the home, she can't do it. And those promises have now become things that she's angry about and guilty for.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just not realistic. So I kind of feel like I'm all over the place. And I just want to say it's complicated, but and it's not perfect. And we don't have perfect answers. And part of it is that we don't have a system that is generous enough to give us everything we need so that we have community in our own homes or where we're living if we're in a congregate housing kind of a situation. We don't offer enough connection and support for people no matter where they live. And it's a matter of will. It's, where do we put our energy and our money and our training and our funding? So there's another tangent I can go off on. I don't know if I answered your question, Amelia.
No, I think you actually did it really beautifully because there's not like these situations are messy, and so the answers aren't always. It's not cut and dry. It's not black and white. You can't just say, "Oh, we'll do steps 1, 2, 3, and then everything's going to be fine." It is so much. There's so much more color there. There's so much more context there. This is all gray. There's no black and white, actually. So I think that was a great answer. I really appreciate it. Brandy, do you have any more questions before we wrap up today?
I just had one question to wrap up as an action point for people, and that is, I guess there's two questions. One is, you mentioned multiple times about how someone can benefit from going to therapy. And can you let the people know how they can best find someone to work with that would be familiar with working with caregivers? And can you let us know how people can contact you if they want to?
Sure. Thank you for asking that. I think more and more we're starting to recognize that specializing in working with older adults is exciting and rewarding. I loved every minute of my career. I'm not doing clinical work right now myself, but one of the best ways to find a therapist who is working in the field is a couple of ways. You can contact your local office for aging. If they have a caregiver support group or a resource center, hopefully they will know some therapists in the community that are doing it. After the pandemic, many more therapists started doing work online. So anybody that's licensed in the state where you live can see you using remote technology. So that is still most places the rule. So knock on wood, hopefully we can keep telehealth for therapy. Another place to check would be a hospital. Ask for the social services department, see who they know. You can also go online to Psychology Today. And on psychologytoday.com, you can look for a therapist and you can filter by state. You can ask for people who work directly with elders. People who work with elders often work with caregivers as well. Look for women's issues. That sounds sexist, but it's often a woman's issue, although I've worked with lots of male caregivers. And also therapists who accept Medicare. At least that's a hint that they're willing to work with aging issues. So that's another thing. So you can filter by location, by population they work with, and by insurance, and that's going to narrow it down to a number of folks and then you can also see who does telehealth and who has openings. So that's going to narrow it down for you. That's kind of a quick way to do it. The way to reach me is probably, let me give you my website. I'm in the middle of updating it because I am launching my coaching practice. And my website is lisakendallconsulting.com. I can get that to you so you can put it in the show notes. And my email is lkendall, 2 L's, 58@gmail.com. And I would love to hear from folks if they have a question, if they just want to talk briefly about, getting pointed in the right direction. I'm happy to talk to people. At this stage of my career, I'm interested in service and in supporting people and getting them to the right place. So happy to talk to folks.
Well, Lisa, you are the GOAT. I think we feel so grateful that you've been back with us here on Care Lab again. Thank you so much for coming on. We will make sure to link Lisa's website in the show notes. Absolutely. So folks, you can find her website, get more information from Lisa, because if you listen to this whole episode, then you know how fantastic she is. Also, if you made it to the end of this episode, please take a moment to like, subscribe, share, follow, leave a comment, leave a review. Those are the best ways for more people like you to be able to find this content that we try to put out for you here on Care Lab. So until next time, we'll see you right back here next Friday on Care Lab.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.